Hello, this is Jensen. You might also know me as the best mid lane in LCS, or at the very least you will soon enough, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one is going to be Xerxe from, well, currently Astralis over his history, Jungler of Splyce. We'll obviously go into all that jazz. I actually want to just start with a very simplistic question at the beginning, which is, I've found your name as one of those names where people have all decided on a consensus, like most people seem to say Xerxe, but I've always noticed it's one of those ones where if people have never heard it said out loud, like a lot of people think it's like Xerxes, like the Persian one. Do you want to correct that at the beginning? Like, how do you actually intend your name to be said? And do you mind that people call you Xerxes or Xerxe or whatever? What's your take on that at the beginning? Maybe we can set the record straight.
Well, initially, I did kind of steal the name from the Persian king Xerxes, right? But I was like 11, 12 when I watched the movie, and I took it like kind of in the Romanian version, which sounds like Xerxe.
Okay.
Without the S, but then I noticed like in time that people have kind of a hard time pronouncing it. So at this point, like I'm kind of just used to hearing it as Xerxe.
Fair enough. Okay, one thing I actually thought would be an interesting place to start in this interview is before we get into all the stuff everyone does know about, like maybe they know that you played with Caps and then obviously they know Unicorns, they know the European stuff basically. But I actually saw one weird detail when I looked it up is you played in that really weird tournament that's always existed in League of Legends, but people just don't know about, where basically, funny enough, it's actually a Romanian company that organises this, PGL if people don't know. And it is that international esports like festival or whatever they call it, right? Which is like, I actually remember this years and years ago, a decade ago, in StarCraft, it used to be like a real tournament. There was like top pros playing it. But the weird thing about it is it's almost like, to explain it to fans, you know when fans always say, wouldn't it be cool if there was like an Olympics for League? It's like, dude, it's been happening for years. It's just, it's an amateur tournament. That's the problem. And so when you're playing it, if you ever look at the Chinese and South Koreans, if there'll ever be any players, like maybe one player played like, the worst LCK team for like one split ever. They're all basically amateurs. But I noticed you actually played in this tournament like way back, but you must have been like, and you just turned like 16 or something, and you had to go to Korea for it. So it must be, bear in mind you weren't a pro, this must be a pretty wild initial experience.
Yeah, because like I did play in a lot of Romanian teams. Like I was playing, I guess semi-pro you could call it, in Romania since I was like 13, 14. And I think that tournament happened around the time I was like 15. I guess I don't really remember because like the whole experience was very scuffed, and like you said, it was like each country was sending like their best team in a very scuffed tournament, honestly. So we were in Korea for like a week, but we couldn't like we didn't even get accounts to play solo queue, and
so you just weren't playing at all. You said to only play the official matches or something.
Yeah, like you just get to the. Okay. It was like a small studio. Like it was like a very small studio. And the games that we played were not even in front of the crowd, like we were playing, right. We were like somewhere in the back rooms where like no one knew like those rooms like that there are even people there. So it was just very weird because like we were playing like very important games, like we played against China and Korea, to move up in the tournament, right? But like our games were not even streamed or anything. It was just, it's like the games didn't exist at all,
Sure.
So yeah, it was like very weird because like we were supposed to play the official games there, but we could not warm up. We could not play any solo queue. They were like, have this hotel, chill, do whatever the fuck you want for a week, and just come at this time to play your official games.
Because I saw after this, obviously, like I alluded to, you did go to Turkey and you played in TCL, etc. One thing I would ask is this, bear in mind, like we're saying, you're like maybe at the end of being 15, 16 around this time, was your family just cool with you going all these different places in the world, like go to Korea, then just go and live in Turkey? Were they okay with that? I would think people would be worried,
No, my mom is like, was very worried for me because like, I mean, honestly, like who lets their like 15, 16-year-old kid just like, like go to Korea, to Turkey, like all by himself and just I was lucky that my father was the one who like really trusted in me, and he like in a way he's the one that convinced my mom that just let the kid do whatever he wants to do. He's good at it, and just have some faith in him. So yeah, my father is the one who convinced my mom to. I mean, she was still worrying about it, right? But he convinced her to just let me go.
When you came to this team, obviously the big player I have to ask is Caps, because he was in the team with you. And in fact, there's even like interesting circumstances people don't know, which is for the majority of the split, he wasn't there. He just came for like the last 2 matches, and then in the playoffs, you won the playoffs. Like, this is a pretty cool story. Like, what I want to know is this, like, one, what was this experience like, this one split? And then secondly, the other part is, people might know famously before he came to the EU LCS, everyone knows all those stories that Caps was supposed to be like mad toxic and all that ridiculous stuff where he was telling Faker, like, get off my champion or whatever. Like, what was he actually like? What was 16-year-old Caps like? Give me the take of this time period.
Yeah, like that whole period of time was very interesting because, like, in Dark Passage, I think we swapped like our mid laner and our support in the span of like a month or two, you know. So Caps came like very late into the team, and honestly, I was very worried initially, you know, because like there were a lot of like bad things about him, you know. Like, I think it was like. And so, a lot of like misplays as well. So I was like very skeptical, but you know, there was no other person that can do the job. So I'm like, okay, you know, just let's just hope for the best. And funnily enough, I actually shared the room with him. But thing is, like, we are both the same age, so like we were both 16, and we weren't very social. And honestly, both of us were like kind of the same. We're like, you know, like we were living with each other. But all day, literally all day, we would just play solo queue, you know, like play solo queue schemes, and then at night, you know, like just go into our room and good night, buddy. See you tomorrow for the grind. So it wasn't like too much going on. It was just very like two not so social kids just grinding the game, really.
I did see, though, a stat that you might be interested in, which this stat said, I can't take if this is true, obviously you have to find it on the internet in claims, right? They said when you played in TCL, you had a 70% kill participation. Now, the reason I bring that up is because everyone thinks Xerxe is just a power farmer, right? So, were you a very different type of jungler back then?
I do think I do think my playstyle has like gone up and down, I guess you could say. But in 2016 and 2017, I think I was like very active. I think I was like very active because I think it was like I don't know anything about like macro or anything like that. You know, it's just like full instincts. Just, you know, just do whatever the fuck you see on your screen and just go for it. You know.
Sure. So, okay, obviously the key part of the story where people will start to know you is when you came to Unicorns of Love, and yet we're on this team for a few different years. Like, one player I want to talk about, because he's almost never brought up in history now, it's like he's been deleted from history, is the German mid laner Exileh that you played with. Because here's the sad thing, he's an example for me of what you call recency bias, where people just remember like the last time they saw him. Because at the end, right, he became sort of like a meme in the EU LCS. But at the time you played him, wasn't the time when you were playing with him, when he was like getting all those like mad solo kills, and he was actually like considered like sort of like a sleeper, really good mid laner, right?
It's funny you bring it up because I was actually thinking about it today. That I was just like trying to think back on my time in UoL, and you know, in Spring Split with UoL, like we made it to the finals, you know.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about him that he was actually, like, he was really good, you know, like he was playing stuff like Vladimir, Kassadin, Katarina, you know, and like he was still able to get solo kills with those champions, you know. So it was very fucking crazy, like how good this guy was. I'm not too sure what happened to him like he was a very friendly person, and you could like talk to him, you know, if he was like doing mistakes. But I'm not too sure what happened this summer, because I think he like completely he had like a very massive shift, and I think he just like it obviously affected his gameplay, and I think it kind of just went downhill because we didn't even make. Actually, we did make playoffs. Yeah, we did make playoffs, but I think we just
lost in the
like,
first round.
Yeah, I think we were like 6th place or something.
Was it wild though? Because as you're saying, like your first split, you were just in the finals. Like what I always wonder about that is, like, did you realise how ridiculous that is? Like on the other hand, someone might actually naively think this is just how it's going to be in LCS. Oh, you just make it to the finals, easy. What was it like to make it on your first split?
Well, I like honestly, I've always had very high expectations of myself, and making it to the finals. You know, I was like, you know, like happy, and I was feeling like, you know, I'm good enough to be here. But I remember, like, after the finals, I felt so devastated because for me, I felt like, you know, this is the standard. Like, that was going to be my standard, you know, to be, like, the very best and just make it to the finals and just, like, compete with the best, right? And losing the finals, like, made me I just felt like, I was kind of like very disappointed in myself because like I felt like I could have done more, but I didn't, and I was like putting a lot of the blame on myself for what happened.
Do you think people play differently in finals from other matches?
I think they do. Like, for example, when I played in Turkey, we weren't even playing in front of the crowd for most of the split, but I still had very like huge anxiety issues. Like my mouse, like my hand on the mouse, like I could barely like hold it, and my heart was like perma like pumping the whole time during the game, and it was like affecting my decisions so much to the point where like it was very hard to focus. So knowing all these issues, going to the finals of that split, like we played in front of a crowd that was like 10K people, and I'm telling you, like the moment I stepped into that stage in front of like everyone, I have never felt calmer,
Oh, okay.
So it was very weird to see that, like when I was playing backstage, no one was watching, and I was scared for my life. And then I step up into the stage, everyone is watching, me, everyone was watching us, and then I just feel so calm. I just knew that, I'm gonna win that series. So like in a way, so that year was like, I guess, a very big stepping stone for me as a player to kind of get rid of the nerves.
Obviously, one of the big names in the team at the time, and you obviously now played with them again in Astralis later, is of course Vizicsacsi. And if this was, in fact, if people remember, this was his MVP split, was that first split that you were playing with him, and basically it was sort of the prime of his career, right? What I want to ask about is this. When I actually did an interview with him last year, I was actually quite shocked because I thought he was going to be a bit like Odoamne, who you also played with later, where like if people know Odoamne, he is absolutely totally fine with the idea he's like the weak side king and that he's only going to every now and then in the right meta get the carry picks, etc. He just kind of knows that's the way his career's gone and that's what he's actually the best at, right? But I actually was shocked because I thought Vizicsacsi was going to have the same attitude because he played like a very similar style at times in his career. But actually Vizicsacsi seemed almost like quite regretful, like he actually feels like in this time period maybe he could have been like a proper star top laner, like maybe he shouldn't have just been a weak side of his whole career after that, and he shouldn't have played the tanks, he should have been a carry player. So I want to know, like, what was it actually like to play with him at this time at his absolute peak, and do you agree? Do you think basically, like, by being a kind of a sacrificial top laner, could he have been a different type of player in LCS if he wanted, in EU LCS/LEC? What do you think?
Oh, I mean, for sure. Like, I think, like, back in 2017, I felt like he was so far ahead of every top laner. And I will never forget this. I just remember the schemes where he was, like, playing Trundle in some matchups. And, like, this guy was solo killing his opponent every single game at, like, level 1, level 2, like, consistently. And I was like, that was so freaking impressive for me at the time, and I do remember like his start like back then was like so sick, and I think he was like I feel like he's a really good player, and I feel like maybe if he hadn't taken the break, even this split, I'm thinking about this split. I don't think he's had a bad split, but I do think coming from like a break for like 2 years, it's definitely not easy, So like considering he's had this long break, I really think he did, like really good, and I think with more time he could go back to that form, but I think it's gonna take a bit of time.
Right, to ask another question about Vizicsacsi, I'm going to sort of bleed into today now when he's in Astralis to tie it in, because basically I actually think this split where, obviously because he's just come back individually, he wasn't particularly good and people kind of flamed him a bit, but I think this split actually shows like some of the essential qualities as to why so many players have wanted to play with him in their careers, and he's actually one of those guys I noticed gets a very high rep from his former teammates. Like everyone says he was great and a really great teammate, because one of the things they always said through the years that started after this period was the notion that he's like a good mind for the game and a shot caller and he can sort of help set things up and give people, right? Basically, in theory now, if he's just come back in his individual form, you think that shows the most. And I think a lot of people would credit that as part of why Astralis got all these wins this split and had so many games where early on it would look good and then the team could even close games out sometimes. Over his career and the times you've played with him, is this accurate? Is Vizicsacsi kind of like a big voice in the team? Is he a shot caller? How would you describe the way he thinks about the game?
It's more than accurate for me, and for me, like Vizicsacsi will always have a special place in my heart because I like when I made it to UoL, he's the one that believed in me, that I can be good enough for LEC, and he vouched for me in UoL, and to me, like that was just like very, he's like my like I just look up to him like a lot, And in all, like I played with him like 2.5 years now. I played in UoL, Splyce, and now in Astralis for a split, right? And every time I played with him, I felt like it was very. He made like the atmosphere like very good. It was very easy to work with him, very easy to talk about the issues. And I think in Astralis it was very easy that we had kind of 3 of the Splyce boys, right? So it was easier to focus on the rookies. But yeah, he was a very big voice in the team and in just like overall our gameplay.
The one last person I want to talk about in the UoL era before we move on is the coach, Sheepy, because obviously he, now that all the big names left, he eventually became like a big name attached to the org because he was there for so long. In fact, if people don't know, he was even there the last few years when they were playing in the LCL still. He was still going to Worlds and all the play-ins and all that jazz, right? Obviously, this is a guy who was around the EU LCS many years, especially with this one particular team, right? I would say the rep he has mainly was because UoL was this team with all these weird players. It's more the idea of him doing crazy drafts or having like weird cheese ideas and stuff. What was he like when he coached you?
I feel a bit bad or like sad because I actually don't remember a lot of the reviews that we were doing in UoL. Okay. All I remember is that everyone hated us because we were like the team that took like 20 to 25 minutes for a review, and I think most of the points were like just about team fighting, and I don't think we were talking much about macro, or I don't remember, but I think like we were like the team that everyone hated because like everyone thought that we don't know any macro and all we do is just go 5 mid and just fight, and a lot of our review points were about fighting, and I think it's maybe nowadays it's not that ideal, but I think back then it sure did work because like we were really good at that and no one was beating us back then. But yeah, all I remember is the review points that were very long, and even us as players were like, "Can we maybe do them a bit shorter?" And yeah, it was just they were just very long.
After this, obviously, you came to the Splyce team, and actually, to tie into the point you're making here, I actually went and looked back at some old interviews, and one point you made that was very interesting was, you actually said that when you joined this Splyce team, this is the one with Nisqy and Kobbe and all those guys, right? When you joined this team, you actually said you tried to come in with your, like, unicorns of love style, you tried to be really aggressive, and basically, like, if you'd have done that, you sort of joked, like, maybe they did just replace you, like, you had to actually become a different style of jungler, so can you give me your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, like I still remember like this one particular play that I felt so miserable at the time because it was like a very basic mistake, where like you go into enemy jungle when you don't have prior mid lane, prior top lane, and you just go all by yourself, And I did not know anything about macro or anything about prior. I just played with my like what I felt is right in the moment, And I got so much flame for that play, It made me feel so bad that I had to kind of reflect, like, like what the fuck am I doing? I need to like step up and learn how to properly play this game. So yeah, I think that was like the moment in my career where I started playing more, where like you make more plans, you think more about the game and you don't rely on like simply doing what you feel in the moment, And I think that was like also maybe the time that I was being called the power farmer, because I think my playstyle like really shifted, and then I had to like overthink, like just like kind of doubt myself, like what I'm doing. So it's not. I don't think it was a bad thing for my career to learn macro, but I think it did make change my playstyle from what I was best at.
One thing I want to ask was, again, when I was looking at the interviews when you were moving to this team, one thing that was quite interesting was, obviously now Peter Dunn has a huge reputation because of what he did with Mad Lions and Splyce, and obviously now over EG in America. But back then, if people don't know, Peter Dunn was like a coach from smaller regions, or just only like players knew him, basically. But you actually said that's one of the reasons you wanted to join Splyce, specifically to be coached by this guy. So was he in some way influential on like the way you changed seeing the game or the way you play?
Oh yeah, like for when I had my first interview with him, I thought he was like very smart and very like he had a lot of knowledge about the game, and like I said, in UoL we don't talk any macro, so like this guy comes to me and talks to me about macro and how I'm supposed to play the game. I'm like, holy fuck, this guy knows what he's talking about, So yeah, I was very excited to work with him and kind of get some of his knowledge.
Right, obviously, I referenced it before, the Vizicsacsi example, because I think in history people group Odoamne and Vizicsacsi together as types of players. Now, obviously, he's a fellow Romanian of yours. What was it like to play with this 1 year with Odoamne? I know it was a weird one because this was actually the year where for him it's kind of whack because that was the one where, like he said that stupid joke about joining G2 and then he got wrecked in the off-season and he just had to like take this off like last second. So it's not like it was like his dream team, but it was an interesting team. Like when I look back, like the team on paper is way better than you'd think now. Although to be fair, that's caused names like Nisqy have gotten better over their careers, but like you look back now, it's not a bad little squad. So what was it like to play with Odoamne? It seems like that would be a very different style from when you were, because here's the key thing, I'm trying to follow your logic here. Yeah. In UoL, if you guys were aggressive and Vizicsacsi was the fucking MVP, I'm guessing you did play heavily around top back then. Whereas when you had Odo, was it more the weak side angle? What was it like in this sense?
Well, how I said, I said Vizicsacsi is like the nice guy. Odo was like the very aggressive guy. And he was like flaming the shit out of me, but like I still like I didn't mind it because I looked up to him, and he was also like he was the first he is the first man that made it to LEC, so like I have massive respect for him. So
sure.
So for me to play with him, was kind of an honor, But I do remember I was like yanking top lane a lot, and we were trying to play around top lane, and I was messing up so many times, and then you would flame the shit out of me in Romanian after the game.
Do you think he went harder because you're Romanian and he could just do it in the language? Do you think he was flaming you more than he would otherwise?
Maybe, but like I would say, he was like very harsh on me, but he was also like, he would like later on, kind of be nice about it, it's kind of like tough love, like I want you to get better, but you have to do this, and this like way better. So that really that was helpful for me.
One thing that I actually would just ask as an aside, by the way, while we're on the topic of like working with top laners, and you've had some really famous ones you worked with, is like one of the cool things about my job is because I do so many interviews and talk shows, even if I'm not an expert, I get to sort of like go really deep into each different roles, positions, and what they think and how they see the map and the game. And so sometimes I feel like I'm able to like give people a different perspective. So what I'll tell you is this: all the really great top laners, right? The number one complaint they have, mate, is always the jungler. Because here's what they all think: there's a lot of junglers, obviously, who are just like solo queue, like Lee Sin style junglers, they're just going for players and they're doing it. They think those guys suck, mate. Every fan thinks those are the best junglers because they're the pop-off junglers, right? The reason the top laners hate those junglers, dude, is because those are the junglers who don't understand waves. Like, they don't set it up properly to come for the gank, they don't know when, like, you're going to get pushed in or whatever. Like, that's the complaint they always say. So what I would ask is this: in these years, if, like, macros are not on the table and you're still learning the game, like, how long do you think it took you before you sort of started to get the sense of that's part of the game? Because I feel like that's, like, another layer to the game that has to be unlocked by players, right?
Mm-hmm. I think I finally I was like starting to get the hang of these concepts around 2018 in that Splyce roster, and like a lot of it just coming from having like really good coaches, because we had Mac, who's on my alliance now.
He was the assistant as well. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we had Duke as well, who I thought he was like really good at the time, but now I think he went into he's on the French broadcast. But
he's a caster or something now. Yeah, sure.
But I still think he's like really good, So I think our coaching staff was really stacked.
Sure.
And I think like also playing with Nisqy and Odo, like they were teaching me about the waves and the state of the waves, how to play around those lanes when it's the right time. So I think that was like the first time I was like, wait, like you can actually play around the waves, that's a real thing, that's a concept. And I think I finally got the hang of it like in 2019.
Oh yeah, before we move on to the next lineup, obviously I want to ask you about Nisqy, because there's the problem, right? Speaking of people whose names shit, his is the opposite to Exileh. Everyone now thinks, because he's really good now, that he was like always just as good back then, and people were like hating on him. Like, the weird thing, if people don't remember, was this was when Nisqy had been in NA and he'd been in Envy, and it was like, it was up and down, Then he came to Europe, played in this Splyce team, and at the time I would actually say it felt like people didn't expect much from him or didn't think he was going to be that good. Or I remember in your team in this particular time, everyone was just saying he's like a one trick on Zoe or whatever. Like, he was sort of getting a bit of flame back then. But I think as people have seen in his career, he's just a different type of mid laner. He seems to have his own perspective on the game. It's why, if you notice, when people start to compliment him, they actually would say stuff like maybe he's a bit like a Doinby or something. That's actually a compliment in the Monday. Obviously, that guy was a world champion. So who is Nisqy the player at this time? Because this must have been a very interesting period in his career.
I mean, I'm very impressed with his growth, and like even back then, I was like very, very fond of him because, like, his attitude was like, we had like a lot of like moments where like we were tilting after like a bad scrim, and that would kind of like ruin the day. But he was always like the guy that was very positive about it and kind of bringing up the mood. So that that was like very impressive because like I think he was like a rookie back then or like his second year or something, So like being able to do that in a team with veterans, because we had Odo, we had Kasing, Kobbe, they were playing for some time. That was just my second year, so I was just there, just to learn. But yeah, Nisqy, I feel like he was handling it very, very well, and it was all like it was very easy to talk to him about matchups, and he was always down to try some weird combination that I wanted to do. Like for example, I still remember where we played Ivan Galio, and I think we like 2v2 the fucking Olaf Rise or something like that, something that like should never win, but like he was always so down to do whatever I wanted, so that I really liked. He was like he was just trying all my weird ideas.
That's something I actually wanted to ask, because there's another thing about players like that on the outside, without hearing the comms, is always hard to know. Is like, is he the one coming up with these ideas for the invades and the roams? Does he follow someone else if they ask him? Like, is it more like you tell him, like, come with me, we're going to go do this, or can we do this?
I think back then it was me, because I think I was still like sometimes like kind of mindlessly doing an aggressive play that enemies are like, wait, why is he doing this play? Like he cannot win this, but he's still doing it. So then they start doubting themselves, and like you win just because it's a mental game, right? Sure. So I think I was like doing a lot of like those things that on paper should not work, but because you're confident in it, and enemies start to doubt themselves, you just like end up winning.
Was it, like, I've asked this question of Vizicsacsi, he was in the same position, obviously, so I'll ask it to you. The thing that must suck about these first few years is you always had the good split as the spring split, and then the summer split would be the drop, and then you always just lost in, like, game 5 of the regionals. So, like, this has to be the most frustrating way to end the split. It probably feels like, in fact, I think I saw in interviews you sort of felt like you were cursed, like you were never going to go to Worlds, right?
Yeah, I remember thinking about that, because it was like 2017, we made it finals, then summer we 6th place. Then 2018, I think we ended up 4th place.
I think it was 3rd, but yeah, 3rd in the first split.
Oh yeah, I think it was third place, yeah, because we played Vitality.
Yes.
And then 4th summer split. What happened?
5th
I think
6th again.
Yeah, it just goes to shit again. Like everything just completely goes to shit. So I think in 2019 I was like very, very scared, because like I was like, am I actually cursed? Like, is this actually happening? But I don't remember like what place we got in spring split of 2019.
That was where you came 4th. That was where like Splyce was pretty good, but
yeah, like they're like decent. Not good enough to compete with the top teams, but like they're not that bad.
Yes.
So yeah, like that summer split was very, very interesting. Like the way everything just turned out.
Sure. So obviously, when you come to the Season 9 Splyce, a player I have to ask about, because again, he's changed so much in terms of the status of his name, is the mid laner Humanoid. Mm-hmm. So if people don't know, this was the story. If people remember, if we rewind it, this was the year when there was that whole storyline that was like, right, there's the 3 players coming out of the ERLs. It's Humanoid, Abadagi, and Nemesis. Now, it actually later became Larson as well, but that was like the original 3. And obviously, the whole story was like, who's actually better? Let's find out. Like at the time, people thought it was Nemesis, and it was obviously back and forth. Right, when you guys got Humanoid, what I notice is, right, here's the thing in sports and esports, Xerxe, right? If you ever, at the end of someone's really amazing career, ask someone at the beginning, like, oh, did you know Messi was going to be good when he was like 8 years old? They'll always be like, yeah, he was just clearly like incredible, They'll always like probably exaggerate it because they want to make themselves part of the story. But I'll give you credit, dude. I went back and looked, and actually in this first year you play with Humanoid, you did say all the really like super positive things that you were saying even back then. Like, he has an insane ceiling, he's already the best mid you've played with, like he just has like a mad attitude, like his mind for the game. He's like, this sounds like really interesting. Like you can sort of see even the first year you played with him, like the potential he had.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I do remember like in the beginning before like we even signed him, obviously like, Nemesis and Abadagi were like the hyped ones, and initially, like we kind of got in theory the 3rd worst one, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, whatever, we just have to work with what we have, right? And yeah, initially like he wasn't that very talkative. understandably, because like he was a rookie, and I think what was his roster? Yeah, I mean everyone was kind of like a veteran on the team. So initially, like he wasn't that comfortable at speaking up his mind and the way he saw the game. And I think in Spring Split it was more difficult being aligned with him. But you could like still see the shining moments, where like he would have like these really insanely good moments, and you can like see what he's capable of. But he also had like the very boosted moments, And I think by in summer he managed to find the more balance, but like to balance the bad plays and be more consistent with the really good plays.
One thing I wanted to ask about with him was, even back then, you actually highlighted the fact that you thought a positive was that he had like a don't care attitude, like he doesn't really care what happens. Now, obviously, like you alluded to there, that's another reason I think people compare him with Caps, because he's the player who like can carry the game, but he'll also just do like a random int in lane, like what the fuck? He just does it. So obviously now, right, even though actually at the time we're recording this, Fnatic has turned it around and they're going to Worlds and it's all fine, okay again now. Right, this year, mate, was looking really bad for him. Like a lot of people were super flaming him. I'd even say that whole like don't care attitude was maybe working against him. People thought, does he really not care? Is he really just like inting the games away? Like when you say that, what do you mean? Like give us a sense of what you mean. Like in what context would he say? Because when it's working well, it sounds like he's pretty badass. It makes him sound like he has a fucking leather jacket. Like I don't give a fuck what you guys think. That sounds pretty cool, like a guy of a movie or something. So who is this guy?
He was that guy, with the leather jacket sometimes. But I do think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, where like he doesn't really get affected by what's happening. It's weird, because like I still like he doesn't show his emotions. Like it may seem like he doesn't care, but I realized in time that he actually cares. But I think the way he plays. I think it depends a lot on the way he feels. Like if he feels like he's in a good mood or like in a good atmosphere, or like whatever the fuck is going on in his personal life, this guy will perform. So I think, and he's just not a very open person. He will not tell you directly. Like, hey, I don't feel there is just stuff happening in my life right now that keeps me from performing. So it's like very hard to get a read on him, how he is as a person. But that's just like my feeling is he performs based on how confident he feels.
One thing I actually want to ask about on this year, not only obviously did you make it to Worlds, but that's how you know this year was different from the cursed years, because in the summer, you even got like voted to the second all-LEC team. Like you got like some status as a jungler. By the way, if people are forgetting, this is the world where like Jankos, Broxer, and all these people who've been international are still in the league. So like, was this a big deal to get like do you care about validation from peers and people in the community and stuff? Does it matter?
Well, to be honest, back then I didn't care that much because I always valued myself like as the bare minimum. I said, I'm a top 3 jungler, and getting those achievements or like rewards, however you want to call them, were just the standard for me. So why would I be happy for something that I already expect to happen? So yeah, I mean they are nice to have, but I was like, just another day at the job.
Would you agree with that statement? Were you the second best jungler at the time?
I honestly don't remember, but if I got it, I probably was, yeah.
That's a good way to think about it. Okay. Like, obviously, when you actually did go to Worlds as well, you had this really weird storyline, because, like, on the one hand, it's true. Like, here's the thing that's weird about this one. This is why you have to put things in context. Before the group stage began, everyone was making fun and being like, oh, this group's whack. Like, what the hell? Like, you only have to beat J Team and you get out guaranteed. Because at the time as well, no one knew FPX was going to win Worlds, to be fair. Like, so, and if people remember, they started out by losing the J Team themselves, so it made everyone look really stupid. It made the group look like, oh, it's like, forget about everyone in this group. Like, as I say, by the end of the tournament, now it looks really good because actually you guys, like, beat them, FPX in a game, which ended up looking pretty good for the playoffs. Like, actually, even if people don't know, even the J Team I've heard behind the scenes actually in scrims was way better than people know, etc. Do you have a story about this Worlds? It sounds like it must have been a very unique experience for your first Worlds.
Oh yeah, I mean for sure. Like it all started from playing. Like it was the best experience of my career and the best feeling. And yeah, like just to talk about the group stage, there was a bit of pressure on. Like I'm not sure about the others, but myself, I guess. The comments were like getting to me were like, everyone was saying that how easy our group is, and I was like, holy fuck, it's my first Worlds, and I also have an easy group, so I have to get out of groups, like all that like stuff going on. So that was like a bit of that's like, I guess, some pressure, but I really don't think so we had I think we had Gam in our group, and it
Yes.
was JT, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think those teams were bad. Like, sure, like they were worse when you compare them to the other groups, but I don't think they were. We were still Splyce, we are still the third seed from Europe. Like, we were not considered that insane, So it was still like those games were like still very, very tough, and those teams were like still fucking good. So us being able to, I think, like, obviously the best thing we did in that group was just managing to go 3-0 in the final day of the group stage, where we had to like play against everyone, and we even managed to get a game of FPX, and then we had to play a tiebreaker against FPX for the first place, So yeah, I mean, I think for that roster and for for how everyone perceived us, I do think it was like good enough.
Since on the past years you kept getting heartbroken and didn't even get to go to Worlds, it's got to be pretty surreal that when you go the first time, not only do you make the playoffs, and then they're just like, yeah, you're just playing against Faker now. Like, all right, cool. Guess I'll just go and do that. Like, that must have been, what was that experience like playing a best of 5 against SKT?
It was honestly so surreal. It's like you dream of those things to happen, or like every pro like dreams of this, and they're like, I really want this to happen one day. It does look very freaking hard and unachievable, but you still I feel like you still have to dream of it. You still have to believe that it's gonna happen eventually, because like I feel like if you don't have faith in yourself that you can do it at some point, then I feel like you don't have a place as a competitor, So being there, being in front of a crowd, and actually just having to play against, SKT, the most prestigious organization, I think that was like one of the best. That was the best moments. Like,
were you able to like enjoy it? Were you nervous? What was the situation?
I was nervous, but it was like good. It was good pressure and good nervousness, so to say. Because like I did want to feel the pressure, or like something huge is about to, something huge in my life is happening, So I really did want to enjoy the moment. And honestly, as delusional as it may sound, I really thought we can win against SKT, But obviously that did not happen. But we did take one game of them.
Thing is, though, like, I have to ask you one thing. One thing that's wild when I go and look, it's like, you definitely just played your style. Like, you played the Gragas, you played a Xerxe game. Like, at least you did what you wanted, right? You got the picks off you wanted, it sounds like.
No, I think that meta at was like really good for me, because I think I was really good on Gragas, on Kiana. Back then the Xerxe was also a thing. So I think like the meta for me was just really good for it.
As you mentioned earlier, because yeah, that's the other thing if people don't know. I actually think the area, I'll probably do like a video on this one day. It'll be like Peter Dunn's legacy or impact on like League of Legends. Because what people don't know is, it's not just what he did as a coach, like as well as all the players he brought in. Look how many coaches came up under him and then just became like coaches elsewhere that were on top teams. So if people don't know, yeah, one of the people on his staff as well as Mac was Duke. And obviously he became the coach after this, right? Who was this guy? Because actually, here's what's interesting. He's another guy where, like, it wasn't me directly he was battling. I think he actually got like triggered by Veteran, like criticising the team or something. But I noticed with him, one thing that's interesting is, first of all, because he obviously mainly speaking French, he even tweets in French and people don't know. So I think a lot of basically people who don't speak French don't really know this guy very much. And then secondly, because this team in particular, this Splyce was like as you said, they weren't like the G2 Fnatic, but you were like one level below, and you were obviously clearly like still in semis and trying to go to Worlds. To him, this was like a good team, and it's like, right, we should get props for this. But then I think he got really annoyed that everyone kept doing all the like thing of like, Splyce can't play the mid game, or they're all just like, it's all sloppy and shit. And I think he got triggered by that. But the key thing is this, basically, having talked to him privately, I get the vibe that it's not that he's just triggered, it's that he actually is a guy who is basically, he is super passionate, but he's also a bit of a whiner. So I actually think he seems pretty legit. So I want to get your take on it, because he can be definitely a bit prickly if people don't know him. But I think he's got a pretty legit mind. He's got some interesting takes for sure.
I loved working with him, because like he had a bit of like Odo's attitude, where like he will like say it up, tell you to your face, you're dog shit, you are doing this wrong, you need to play better here and here, and that was like kind of the style of coaching that initially like I wasn't very comfortable with it, but like after working with Odo and after working with Duke, I got more comfortable with it, and I realized, I really like being told, hey, I'm shit, I need to do better. So I really, that for me, that style was very beneficial. Not everyone in my team agreed with
I could
it.
imagine, sure.
I do remember the whole mid game. I do think he was like very. I think you described it best. He was very passionate about the game, but I think he was like reading too much into like what people were saying about us. And yeah, sure, maybe our mid game wasn't the best, but who cares? Like I don't want to like focus on any outside opinions or perspective. I just want to have like our own bubble, and just like focus on ourselves. And I think he like gave into that a bit at some point. But I mean, for most of it, I was like very happy to work with him.
Sure. Okay, so since you brought it up, because obviously, like, this is the team that basically, let's be real, this 1 year, I think basically you never escaped this narratively. Like, to this day, everyone just assumes that. Here's what's funny. That's why I brought up the topic earlier about the Unicorns Love thing and the fact you yourself said you had to adapt to come to Splyce. Because basically, people actually think you're the opposite player to who you started as. Like, the joke is they think you're like what Smithy was at the end, like you just only farm and then just go to a lane to gank, basically, like when it's like a perfect gank. And they think that's what you want to do and that like it's your choice. Whereas actually, like I said about that Vizicsacsi example earlier, it sounds to me like you almost think like if your career had gone differently, I'd be the super aggro jungler, I'd be like El Yoya or something, I'd be the MVP of the league. Did playing in these teams like alter your style forever? Have you ever gone back to it? Do you think people overrate the idea you're just the power farmer or the more passive? I know these are all like cursed terms now, but you know what I mean by them.
No, like I would say, like my mentality has always been to have a very open-minded about my gameplay and my playstyle, and in a way that was like good and bad because like I was like too open to feedback at times, and maybe I didn't like. I guess double check it, like really make sure, hey, like what this person is saying to me right now, is this the right thing for me, And the fact that I guess like being the rookie and being younger kind of like made it a bit worse because I was very I don't know what's the word, but like when you trust people like too easily.
Maybe a bit naive.
Yeah, I think I was a bit too naive, so maybe like that was that's why I think my playstyle was just very up and down and like not very consistent, not very not really knowing where do I want to go, because I was like listening to maybe too many people, and I think that was like part of it. Now that I think back on it.
One thing I want to ask, though, because I actually think someone listening to this interview in 2022 is going to get an unfair sense of this time, though, because one thing I wanted to like shade in to ask you about is when people said in this era, like, oh, like Splyce now has like good early games, but then like they have like a dodgy mid game and then they end up in the late game and then they have to win because, like Kobbe carries a team fight on Sivir or whatever, like, like the classic, if you remember back then. Right, when people flamed you guys like this, well, to be fair, earlier in the interview, we did say this was the team where you yourself were like learning macro concepts and waves and stuff. And I think the detail a modern fan will miss is this is before Riot put in place those like dragons and the setup that we have now. So now I always say like they made the game actually pretty obvious as to how you're supposed to win the game. Like the win conditions are built into the game. You even have timers when when they come in. But the joke is back then, that's why everyone used to worship G2 this year, because they had like a mid game they could do anything. They could split push, they could do this over here, they could skirmish all game long, they could give up the dragons. Like it was like macro was a lot more complicated in this period, right before the dragons.
That is a really good point, because like I just remembered when I was in UoL, I think like the reason why I was like really good and really aggressive is because like back then now you get a notification, like when a camp is about to spawn, like 1 minute, you get the gray notification and then the yellow bullshit 15 seconds, and back then this was not the thing, so you had to manually track down all the camps, if you really wanted to do. And I think I'm fairly sure like I was like the only one doing that, so like I would like take your raptors at like 2 minutes and then I would be like there at like 4:15, because like I knew the timer, so I was like not only like typing them down, but I was also tracking them down in my head. And I swear to God, like no one knew like how to play when I was like perma invading, because like I felt like none of the junglers back then were like tracking their own camps, so I do think the macro right now is very easy, like way easier than it was back then. And yeah, like the game has just become fairly like easier, like it's still, you can still do you can still get smart about the game now. But I think back then, like if you were like very smart about the game, you could like win games just off like just being smart, just having some decent macro.
What you're saying there makes a lot of sense, though, because that's the other thing that I always thought never made that much sense about the criticism. Because one thing I used to do was, I used to criticise Splyce the team, but I was always like, as a jungler, you're obviously a good jungler, because here's the problem. If people are being like, they've got nothing in the mid game, it's like, well, it's not like the other junglers invading you all the time or fucking you up. Like, it sounds like your strategy, that sort of makes sense as to how you're able to neutralise the other jungler, right? If you're taking his camps at the right time, he has to basically, just to do his own jungle, he has to figure out where you are all the time, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, jungle for me, like, has always been like a very difficult role to judge, because I feel like a lot of the plays a jungler can do are also based on the informations that your laners give you, right? So you are very fortunate and you have laners that are good individually and are gonna set up easy plays for you to execute, right? But I also think there are like, it's just like if you don't have those, like you have losing laners who don't even give you information, then I think it's like very hard for you as a jungler to shine, and you have to like get very creative to either doing some more risky invades or like trying to set up those plays all by yourself, like by actually teaching your laners how to lane, so it's a very difficult role to judge, because I feel like there is a lot of what the junglers do is like a lot of the things that you maybe don't see as a fan, or like even as a player, I do not know how like this guy works, because I don't know how he talks to his teammates. So it's very difficult to get a grasp of like how good a jungler is.
For sure. Right, one thing I thought was very interesting is another part of your jungle style, and actually if people don't know, there's a really great piece you can go and read about this. It's on that website. Let me think, what was it called? I can't remember, because I only know there's like a sports version of it, like in sports where they get Ghost Right for pro athletes. That one's called like Players Tribune or something. What was the esports one called? Do you remember? It was something similar, right? Was it also called Players Tribune?
I think it might have been it. I feel like I remember something I did, but it
might even have been. Yeah, basically, it might even have been the same website. But basically, it's where they got that guy who was one of those interviewers from like EU LCS, and basically he like, I assume, interviewed you, and then he like ghost wrote apart from your perspective, right? And it was all about actually the fact that you have like a really open mind to picks and how you've brought in some of the picks. Right? So, by the way, I'll even link it in the description box. It's a great piece to read. Like, I think it's very interesting for your perspective. So the thing I want to ask is this though, like as I alluded to there, like even though it says Xerxe on it, you didn't literally write it all yourself. Like I assume you did the interview and the other guy wrote it up, etc. Yeah. But I wanted to ask about the topic though, because actually when you described all this, a lot of the picks suddenly you did over the years made a lot of sense. Like you basically literally said, whenever a new champion comes out, even if no one else is thinking about it and it's considered off meta, you actually always like spam it, explore it. You're always looking for an edge. Now the reason I find that interesting, mate, is first of all, a lot of pro players, I'd say that's their biggest problem, is they don't want to sort of like look stupid on something new, so they stick with what else is meta and what else is the strongest and the most obvious picks. But I've actually noticed in history, I think that's a great way to get an edge on people though. When something new comes out, if you're the first one to master it in any way, you can have a huge edge, right?
Mm-hmm. No, for me, why I think I'm gonna play this game for like many more years is because for me, when the game gets boring and it gets stale and the meta is defined and you have only 3 champions that you have to play over and over again, like to me that the game gets very boring. And I always try to find an edge, like when there are like the 3 champions being played over and over again. Like I think like there has to be something, like I hope, like I scroll to all the 160 champions, and I think of them, maybe some ideas are just stupid, but I still try to like think, hey, could this work, and then I just like give it a shot in scrims. Maybe it doesn't go too well, and then the idea is just, I just grab the idea and I try to come up with something new. And I feel like it was easier back then to be more creative, because I think the patch notes were were more often than they are right now. Like now it's 2 weeks actually. Maybe it's the same. Maybe I'm just saying bullshit. But I think the changes were like bigger, and were more like you had changes for more champions. But to me, like when the game gets changed, like I always find it interesting because it brings back my interest in the game, and I take a lot of pleasure in figuring out the game. Like that's what like really drives me to play the game, because otherwise it would just get boring, And yeah, like I remember when Ivern when I was playing it, Ivern in 2017. no one was playing that champion.
This is when it
Everyone
was just released, right? It wasn't even in pro play at all. Yeah.
yeah, like that shit was really broken. You know, it had like 70% slow for like 30 seconds, and like everyone refused to play it, and I was like the only one playing it for like maybe 2-3 weeks. And
what do you think puts people off a champion like that? Like, why do you think the other ones just ignore it?
I think not only it had like a very niche playstyle, because like it was like the supportive playstyle, you know, where like you can't really fight anyone by yourself, but it also had the whole the way you had to take camps, you know. It was like very unusual for most junglers, and like for me, I like trying out new stuff. I do not know how other junglers work. I mean, I guess they don't like to get out of their comfort zone. I don't know, but yeah. So I remember it was like 3 weeks, somewhere around that, until like everyone like started playing it, and then it kind of like spread to other regions as well. 2018 it was as well, because it was like this very slow meta, you know, the 40-50 minutes games with Azir, Sivir, just like full late game, and there was like a lot of Sejuani and Skarner and Xerxe, I think. So Trundle was never picked before, you know, and that was like the first time I played Trundle in pro play, and it was like a pick that like made a lot of sense, but like no one figured it out, you know. And I still remember I played it in scrims against I think it was Vitality, and they had Gilius back then, and I was so mad because like Vitality played on stage before us, and Gilius got to play Trundle before me.
So it looked like he'd invented it or brought it out first, right?
Like I would say I was a bit like salty.
Right.
I was a bit salty about that, you know. But I do remember him. I think he did say that, you know, like he got inspired from me. Yeah, so like you know, I was happy about that, but like I was still a bit salty that I was not the first one to pull it off, because like when I brought up the pick, I was like holy fuck, you know, this makes so much sense. It's so good, you know.
Didn't you also say as well that like after it was played this week, it actually became like the worldwide meta? Like everyone started playing it.
Literally 1 week after that, like 1 week after that weekend in LEC, it was being played worldwide. It became like a very meta pick. That I remember, because like I was so proud of my creativity, I guess.
Sure. But what about because there's a couple of other champions I want to ask about as well, just because how they've been associated with your career. So obviously we referenced it earlier, but even though now obviously it's probably played more often like top lane, etc. Like, but you were one of the original jungle Gragas that was really fucking banging in these seasons, right? It's probably your best champion at one point, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean I checked my career stats, and apparently it is my best champion. I don't know, like for some reason I'm just like very very good on it. I just like see angles that I guess other players can simply see on it. I mean, I think it's normal, like a lot of players just will feel a champion more than others, you know, like just like they will just see angles that other people cannot see it.
Because along those lines, the one other one I wanted to ask about, because this is more like the old school fucking Xerxe, but the people don't know you were actually really good on Rengar, which is obviously in the West, is like the joke is like, no, all the Western junglers always suck, isn't it? It's always some like LPL or LCK jungler who plays that. Like, it's hard to imagine your modern style on Rengar, so what's a Xerxe Rengar game like?
Like, it's actually so weird, because like, I do remember that Rengar that was like really broken, that had the kind of the Olaf ult, a mini Olaf ult on the W. But I actually, for some reason, I checked my stats a while ago. I saw that I have really insane stats on Rengar, but it's like my memory has erased all the Rengar games. It's like, like honestly, if I didn't know that I had played Rengar, I would have assumed that I never played Rengar in my career, you know. So for some reason, I lost all memory of the Rengar games.
Fair enough. Okay. Right, what about this then? Oh yeah, one other thing I want to bring up before we close down like the individual style, and we'll ask about some of the other parts of your career. One other thing to mention, which is also going to be forgotten. This is why I think those years in Splyce did just like, it made your narrative just be like set in stone and no one's ever allowed to change it now, and it just has to be like that. The other factor they forgot is this, Xerxe. You were playing with Kobbe as your ADC. Now here's the thing, I'm not going to diss Kobbe. I don't think he's like a bad player at all. I think he's actually been a pretty good LEC player, but to me, I always used to say it, again, no diss, to me he was like reckless light. It's like, right, just get him through the laning phase, he's going to carry the team fight. Like, by the way, he's like a classic ADC like that. So as a result, if you have him as your ADC for 2 years, you're going to want to get to late game team fights and let him carry those team fights, right? So I think, didn't the style of the team also probably in this sense you had to kind of play the way you played in that particular team, right? Like that wasn't a year when you were like the bot lane was just going to smash lane every time and then just come out and destroy the mid game, was it?
Well, you do bring a good point, because like I feel like you have to adapt to your strengths and your weaknesses as a team, right? Like if I was to keep doing my own thing, like what would happen? Yeah, sure, I can maybe play for myself and try to look good for myself, but like I still did want the team to succeed, and I did feel like a lot of the success was that we had in that Splyce roster was because what we were doing. And sure, it doesn't look fancy, it doesn't look nice, maybe it's boring, maybe it's slow, it's whatever, but it got us the wins, and to me that was like the most important, like that is the most important thing, like getting the wins. So maybe like unintentionally, by doing all these things, like they kind of, you don't even realize when they kind of become part of, maybe like they become part of your playstyle, and it takes a while to kind of remove them when you move to another team.
This video was kindly supported by Kill Your Inner Loser, Ahmed Haju, Matt Pugnaccio Racula, Paul Villa, Travis Goff, Adam Oaks, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Hades, Jensen Gore, Kovacevic, Pacey, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Toucan, and as always, special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my shows? Would you like to ask a question in my Patreon AMA? Maybe you want teasers, find out who the next Reflections guests are or upcoming talk show guests. Do you want to take part in one of those long donated discussions with me? Well, if any of the above or more sound interesting to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.